My name is Mal the Gothic, and I'm going to show you some progress that I made. So let's do an art thing, painting the Saturn V. This is part 2, if you haven't seen the previous video, where I am working on a set of commissioned plywood boards for a friend of mine. And today I actually have a lot of progress to share with you. However, we are only going to be focusing on one of the 3 images. So of them, one of them is going to be a Saturn V, the other one is going to be a stadium, and the last one is going to be the helmet catch image from the 2008 Super Bowl. I have not done any work on the stadium one. That one is just kind of still where it was last time. I actually have some work on the football player, so maybe I'll do a little sneak peek if you want to see what that looks like. Here's the work I've gotten done on that. And the Saturn V one, it is not entirely done. However, it is so close. There's one element missing, and it's just the monkey knot. But I'll wait and show you the process of how I got from a blank background with just a moon to actually painting this whole Saturn V. I'm trying out a new editing software this week, so I am so sorry if it's a little janky. I am trying my best. I'm really excited. This project has come along so well so far, and I really feel like I'm just pushing myself in like what I can accomplish. So fingers crossed you enjoy it just as much as I do. Without further ado, here's my process of painting the Saturn V.
So this video is starting from the standpoint of I already have the base of the Earth done. And by that I just mean the gray blob that you see. So before I did anything else, I wanted to do the atmosphere, because while the atmosphere does sit on top of the Earth, when you look at it, it more of kind of rests behind it. And so I wanted to do a technique very similar to how I did my mural for my wall, which was use a car sponge and kind of layer up dark colors first, and then add my medium and then my light tones on top of this. I kind of had experimented with a couple different tones of blue to figure out which one I liked best, and my first layer was 100% pure, just the dark blue, no white added, because I knew that was what was going to blend into the black background the best. The next layer of this was just mixing a little bit of white into that same blue and trying to feather it out, keeping my most concentrated pigment towards the actual Earth itself and kind of just feathering that up and mixing it out into the depths of space. I sort of was leaving a gap where I thought the rocket would be, however, I wasn't super confident in where the boundary of the rocket was, so I did end up kind of just slowly encroaching that in, because it is easier to paint the rocket on top of the atmosphere than it is to try to fill in the missing sponged atmosphere behind the rocket. So that's why I kind of encroached that gap a little bit. But I just repeated this with ever increasing lighter tones to get a really nice atmosphere gradient. I did have to walk away after a little while because you need to let it dry in between. You want to do several layers at once if you can, because there is an advantage to it being slightly wet. The colors blend together a little bit more, and you can get a little bit more of a seamless ombre between your colors. However, if you're trying to build up intensity, too wet paint is actually going to be a disservice, because when you put wet paint on top of wet paint or semi-dry paint, it could actually pick that up, and then you are left with gaps in your paint instead of more paint on top of it. Once I had a good bit of atmosphere down, I realized that I should do the stars sooner rather than later. So I took, this is actually the same paint that I used as the stars in my mural. It's called String Cheese. It's of another Behr paint, and a round brush that was wet. And I just kind of lightly tapped the brush over the painting to get this really nice splatter of stars. I did a couple of those before I realized I should cover the moon so that I don't get random stars on my moon, because last I checked there's no stars between the Earth and the moon. And so that took me a little bit of time, but really I was just trying to get a varied but dense kind of cloud coverage of stars. I do know that in a lot of pictures, depending on how close you are to the Earth, you can't actually see the star field. I don't care, this is an artistic representation, and I wanted stars in my background. Before I tell you about this next step, see if you can spot the hazard in this picture, because something will go wrong. But the next step was to actually define my horizon line again. Because I had taken my blue over the Earth to make sure that I got that seamless line, I needed to redefine it, and I am using that String Cheese white to basically solid white to brush against my horizon line and fill in and start to bring that color actually down onto the Earth. any image of the Earth from space has this really nice, bold, stark white horizon line, and so I wanted to make sure I could capture that. And I had a little bit of leeway in some of my lines, and there it is. Yeah, I knocked my water cup over. Please be aware of where your water cup is, folks. Don't do what I did. This was a mess. Luckily, I don't think it damaged the boards. I just picked them all up off the ground. I put paper towels under the affected areas and decided I was out here and all the paint was already open, so I might as well keep working on it. And so I was basically using the same sort of blues that I had already mixed for the horizon to try to come up with my earth blues and tones. Originally, I had no concept of how the sphere of the earth works, because this is a challenge in perspective. This entire painting is a challenge in perspective, because this is just a corner view of the earth, and so I want to make sure my brush strokes are kind of indicating that curve, but this painting is on such a scale, the earth is on such a scale in this painting, that the curve is much shallower than you actually might think it is. But I was just using a nice, light, soft blue to kind of just generally create a solid foundation for the entire earth. I was trying to make sure that I blended my blues with my white up at the horizon line. In some places that worked better than others. That's why we do multiple coats. And if you'll notice, I am not trying to do any one particular area of the earth in this painting. Again, the earth is big enough, and this painting is at such a scale relative to it, I had no idea how to conceptualize where a continent might be on this, and then does it matter what continent or what part you can see based on the curvature of the earth, and that sounded really complicated, so I was just sticking with big blue marble, and that was hopefully going to be enough. The entire intention was make it look recognizable enough as the earth, because it is not the focal point of this painting, so it didn't need to be absolutely detailed and perfect. I think if I had tried to do that, it all would have gotten covered up by the rocket anyways, and I would have been very sad. So the way I approached the green was kind of more like a teal. I don't remember exactly what green I was using. It might have been Hunter's or Viridian green, but I just kind of knew I wanted it to be in some of the sections where the blue was already, so that there were some different color tones and variations, because again, I don't know what part of the earth this is, but it needs to look like something more than nothing. And I was also working on building up some more of those blue tones, and just kind of darkening up the whole thing, because I thought it was a little bit too bright and cheery. Looking at the video, the green is not coming up as well on camera. I could have sworn it looked a lot more green in person, but I might just be a little bit delusional, but I really was trying. And again, just kind of blending it up with the horizon, and basically just trying to make this whole thing cohesive. I spent a lot of time brushing arcs onto this tiny corner of the painting. At this point, I thought the atmosphere was looking a little rough and patchy on some points, and so I basically remixed kind of that mid blue I had, but also definitely much more that dark blue I had, the original tone of the blue, and kind of took it from the outside in. First, I took it from the earth out in that original clip, and now I'm taking it from basically the outside of space in on top of the blue. The hope being that these darker tones of blue, when layered on top of the underlying ones, kind of brings it all together, kind of cohesive, almost a reverse underpainting of sorts, because this layer of pigment is relatively see-through. Apparently, I really like painting murals with sponges, because I also decided to use the sponge for the clouds. This was moderately successful, and I think it would have been more successful if I had looked up an actual picture of the Earth from space to use as a reference for what clouds look like. I didn't. I thought, how hard could it be to make clouds? I think very hard when they're on such a massive scale. I had no plan. I was just kind of doing shapes and kind of changing the intensity of it, and I was struggling a little bit because the edges of the sponge were actually showing up way too crisp, and I think it's because of the fact that it's white, and white just shows up with such strong contrast against almost anything else. So once I had kind of what I thought were decent clouds, I went through with a same white and just kind of very diluted, so a lot of water on the brush, and kind of tried to clean up a lot of the areas and blend things together and attempt to make it look a little bit more cohesive. I thought it looked a lot better once I kind of added some like soft brushy strokes to the clouds, because it brought it into the same kind of texture that was underneath of those horizontal curved brush strokes. So that sort of helped. Again, a lot of it got covered up by the rocket, so it's not too big of a deal, but yeah, I'm still not the happiest with these clouds, so tell me what you think I could have done better. I think in the first place, if I'd looked up a reference image. Another thing I kept screwing up was the placement of these boards and aligning them next to each other. I should have taped them. I really, from the back, should have taped these boards together so that they did not move. I did not do that. I do not know why. So that kind of became an ongoing challenge. I'm pretty sure the Earth horizon line is still slightly screwed up at this point in time recording this audio, but it's all right. I still have plenty of time to fix it. But these clouds, I just kind of kept adding to it because I didn't know when to stop.
You know, through the camera, I think it looks a lot better than I personally think it does right now in person. I don't know if I like the clouds. I'm struggling with the clouds. I like the atmosphere a lot more. I think that last coat of blue to kind of bring the darkness down really helped. I think I'm going to leave the atmosphere alone, otherwise I'm going to get myself in trouble. So, what comes next is actually drawing more accurately where the Saturn V goes from its tip, which is going to be all the way over here, all the way down to where I'm pretty sure the booster is going to be, which is here, and it's going to be like from here to here. It's going to be a pretty big section. I think it crosses a little bit. I just didn't want there to be some, and then this is going to be most all flame, so I'm not too worried. I wanted there to be enough stuff over the whole Earth that it looked correct, so because I think the base colors are going to be really hard to add to once I get the Saturn V done, but we'll see. So yeah, next step is mapping, redrawing, and then basing it out. I'm thinking I'm going to do it in the same gray like I did the Earth and the Moon, because I think that's going to make my life a lot easier to build whites and darkness up on top of it if I at least have gray. I also actually have a good idea of how he's supposed to look, so I'm going to do some character drawings and make sure I can get the monkey sorted. But yeah, now is Saturn V, which means not screwing up the most important piece of this painting. So that's a little terrifying, but here we go.
So while I did measure the ratio of the width of things, I didn't actually, of like each section, I am realizing I didn't actually measure the length of the sections to each other and try to get that ratio somewhat right. So who knows how this is actually going to go. Because I'm mostly noticing this section I think feels really short, and also really skinny. Like that feels really much too skinny for what it should be. So, and honestly, this thing is probably just too long in general, but like, I hate it a little less after coming back to it. So, and then my shapes are all wonky up there, but I think the where I'm going to start is actually up there, because I think, you know, if I do the capsule and it looks good, I'll get some confidence and we'll keep going. I have some pretty strong pencil lines because I first drew 2 straight lines before I realized that technically there should be slight illusion effect because it isn't just a flat horizontal, or at least I'm overcomplicating it for myself by not making it a flat horizontal. I'm making it kind of flying at you. So I've decided to add perspective and problems. I've written down my measurements for what stuff should be kind of up there because I can't see where each section starts and ends. So my hope is those measurements allow me to like figure that out a little bit better. But yeah, I think I'm going to start up there. It's either I'm going to start up there or I'm going to start all the way down there, because if I do that, then I could do all like the flames and stuff and that could be really fun. Or I could start at the point that like is smaller and I think might be easier. So I think I'm going to start up there. But I think the Earth looks slightly less trash with the rocket on top. I don't know if I've said it in the voiceover yet. I'm not the happiest with the clouds. I think it looks like Earth. I think it's going to be fine. I think I'm going to leave it alone. They annoy me. I can always add more, but they annoy me in their current state. So we will see. But yeah, I think we're going to do a capsule. So once I based out the rocket, I decided to start from the top down because I thought that would make the most sense, and it gave me a very small, very controlled area to start working with. So I used the gray that I'd used as the background as kind of my base for all of this, because when I was using just the white, it was very stark, very cool toned. And I just kind of winged it. I did a full pencil drawing. I put all the details on. I shouldn't have done that. I immediately painted right over them because I had to do the base first before I got to any of the smaller details on top. And the way I did this is basically, yes, I did a gray base already, but I basically put a lighter gray base directly on top of it. I did make sure to try to preserve the color difference between the sections of the rocket. So here, the nose cone, the cap that is protecting the crew capsule, is a lot brighter than the section underneath it, which, as you can see, I did as kind of a darker gray. Then I mixed up some grays, and the image I am using is an artistic representation of the Saturn V, and it also is a forced perspective of the Saturn V, so it's supposed to be coming at you. This gave me a lot of challenges in the long run, but I was trying to use the lighting scheme and kind of directions from this image to kind of direct what I was doing with mine. And that meant that on the kind of underside, which here is more towards the top of the screen, there's a little bit of a shadow going down kind of that third there. So I started layering it up on top of it. This is the approach I took to most of the Saturn V, was I had to base out the entire under shadow structure before I could do any of the detailing on top of it. And I definitely got better at it as I went along, and I think it was absolutely the right thing to do to start with this smaller section, because it gave me a sense of confidence in what I could do, because going into this, I had no confidence because I was really annoyed and really grumpy with the Earth. So going from really disorganized, kind of terrible looking clouds to the focal point of this piece was kind of terrifying, I'm not gonna lie. Once I felt the underlayer was dry enough to really go back in with details, for this portion of it, I freehanded a lot of them, which is really not what I should have done. I went from a nice pencil underlay to kind of completely freehanding very, very straight lines. I did kind of learn my lesson after this and started penciling in a lot more of the details. Um, this nose cone, I don't think I quite achieved the forced perspective the way I wanted. However, it's all right. I think it still gets the point across, and it still looks exactly like what it's supposed to, and you can tell. But I think if I had done a little bit more time and taken the time to draw a pencil sketch of these details, that the perspective might have come through a lot stronger. The details on this section were relatively straightforward overall, though. And this is kind of what set the tone for how much detail I was going to include in this entire piece, and the answer was more than I think I thought I was going to. The Saturn V is a rocket very near and dear to my heart, and I know what it looks like, so this thing needed to look like the Saturn V, otherwise I was not going to be happy with it. There were multiple points in time where I wasn't entirely happy with it, but it was just a lot of patience and kind of trusting the process and eventually trusting myself that I know how things are supposed to look. I know how to paint, I know lighting and shadows. Lighting is something I do struggle with sometimes. I've learned perspective is another one of those things, but this was such a process. What you're seeing here is those little thrusters on the side of the capsule, and I think the scale of this is all wrong. I think these are huge for the size that the overall like capsule is, but it's all right. You know, you can tell what they are and the detail gets the point across, but this is kind of what I mean. Perspective and scaling is definitely a challenge, but in the end, if it looks like what it's supposed to, is it that big of a deal? Because you can see these pieces on the side are just not the same size. They are not in quite the right perspective if this is how you're looking at it. But yeah, I absolutely freehanded every single piece of detail on this section, for better or for worse. One of the details I did try to be consistent with throughout this entire thing was my shadows. And so these lines that I added to accent the details that were on that capsule section, I think made it pop. This also definitely drove a lot of how I approached so many of the lines in the little add-ons and pieces to the Saturn V in the future. Just a little bit of shading can help tell you so much about the direction and the place of the object in space, and it is just so important. So we have a little time skip here, and this is probably at least 4 hours, if not 2 days. I kind of tended to work on this in 2 hour sections at a time. And what I'm doing is fixing the width of this section of the rocket. I did start to do math and calculate the ratios of the length of each of the pieces using the image, using my reference image as kind of my base. And so if the sizes were a 2-to-1 in the reference image, then it doesn't matter how big mine is. I just need to make sure the components of my image also have that ratio of 2:1 for it to look correct. And they didn't, so I had to fix that. So I painted over a bunch of stars. It was such a small section, I really don't think you can tell in the grander scheme of things. I do think, however, I am going to go back in and fill in some of those stars a little bit. But this was absolutely necessary because before I did it, I was looking at it and it was just so wonky. It was so wrong. But one of the things I did as well is I lengthened this section, so I then had to kind of try to blend this new paint into the paint that I already done the day before, which was a very hard time because any artist will tell you it is very hard to remix the same color exactly. So I was having that trouble here. You can kind of see some tones of this are a little bit more of a greenish gray, other ones are a little bit more of a bluish gray. I had previously mapped out the lines for where the black sections of the rocket would go. However, that was before I changed the structure of those sections. So I mapped them out again lightly with a thin black brush before I went through and fully filled them in. These sections were much easier compared to the white ones because the shading is a lot softer. Black, especially in space, it's a very intense kind of absorption of all light, and so it has to be a very strong light for it to kind of show up as a highlight on the black sections. The only difference to this is those sections that happen to be at the edge of the rocket, those have a much stronger reflection on them and ended up being a lot more of a gray, because otherwise you wouldn't be able to tell them apart from the background. So that is both a necessity and a lighting just feature, because there is a little bit of a highlight on that bottom section of the rocket. If you're wondering what I'm listening to while I'm working on these, it's been a variety of YouTube videos, my Spotify playlists, occasionally a podcast, kind of whatever strikes my fancy. But I do tend to like music, it just gets me in the mood, I'm bopping along to it, very much focused in the zone, and can probably lose and have lost hours of my day painting because I am just so focused on what I'm creating. That is until the heat in my garage becomes slightly unbearable. It depends, kind of what gets me first. I either get to a really good stopping point or I am physically unable to spend more time in my garage. The other challenge that this painting posed, though, when it came to these angled sections, is trying to keep that shading consistent on the angle, because angled surfaces, the shadow is going to strike them at a little bit different than those flat surfaces. And so I did have a little bit of trouble here where I had made the angle too dramatic and taken it a little bit too much in the wrong direction. And so getting that resorted was a little bit of a challenge, and I kind of had to fudge it a little bit. But from this point on, I started getting a lot better about using my pencil to mark things out, especially when it came to the lines on this section of the rocket, because this is kind of, again, that optical illusion. It's coming towards you, and on a conical section, getting that right is really hard. I don't think I got it right, all that being said, but I mapped it out with my pencil to make sure I understood kind of the direction the lines should change, and then went in with a gray for the dark sections. Actually, it was a gray for both of them. It was a lighter gray for the white sections, and it was a little bit of a darker gray for the black sections to kind of help highlight that feature of the rocket. I definitely should have actually drawn out every single one of these I was going to do in pencil, because they are not the most consistent in width from each other. They are not the most consistent in size, because I am using a paintbrush to paint them, and I don't have the best control, so you can see some of them are a little wobbly. The middle section of the rocket was more of the same. I had gotten a lot of confidence in kind of how I was approaching breaking up my shading and doing all of these little detailed sections. I did do more math to kind of figure out how long this bottom section should be based on the reference image, and even then I did extend it a little bit, and I arguably kind of could have and maybe should have extended it further. I think the end product is fine, but again, I think the forced perspective was screwing me up a lot here. You can see all the way down to the bottom where I thought the gray engines were going to be originally. That is not where they ended up. They ended up shifted a good several inches up higher. Also in frame is some of the other detail work. You can see a lot of those lines on all of those different sections and some of those other little details that were on the rocket. But this is kind of how I worked in sections, basically base out 1 to 2 sections in the shading, before I went back and actually started adding all of the detail. I even measured the ratio of how tall these lines should be on each section to try to get those to look accurate, stretching it a little bit when I got down towards the bottom because I thought it needed to be just a little bit longer, a little bit taller, the rocket that is. Another thing to note here is you can see just how drastically it narrowed because, again, I had not taken into account the forced perspective of the image, and so I had to kind of redraw it. So this is where we are with the Saturn V, and this is the full rocket. It stops here. So what does that mean? Well, that means the boosters, those little pumpty-doos, are going to go up here, and then I'm just going to cover all of this with flames, because what's going to come directly out of the boosters is like white flame, and then orange, or yellow to orange, and so all of this is going to be covered by the flame directly from the booster, and then it'll just kind of like fuzz out in the rest there. So I'm not worried about that at all. This is not done. It's missing the 2 American flags that go on this section. It's missing the other one along those doodads, which goes from this section all the way down to there. And then, of course, it's missing the boosters and fins. But that's the body of the rocket done. Wow, it is hot in my garage, so I am having to work in pretty short sections in order to not die of heat. Yay, south. But yeah, I think I am honestly really happy with how this is coming out so far, and it's going much better than I thought it would, so yay. And the final step was the boosters. And so I chose to do the flames first because, much like the atmosphere, I knew it was going to be a nightmare to draw the flames on top of the booster versus the boosters on top of the flames. So I kind of arbitrarily figured out where those went, and the colors I used for this are exactly the colors I used for the orangey red portion of my wall mural. I kept them because I barely used any of them. Oh my goodness, when you're doing a mural, these paints last for ages. But I kind of went back to good old faithful sponge technique and layered in my light first, and then kind of filled the area around it with yellow, making sure to go up on the sides of the rocket because, again, there are 2 boosters that are kind of off to the side that you can't exactly see. So I wanted to make sure that I still kind of accounted for those. Eventually mixing the yellow and the white because that kind of got me some of those better tones of the true background, because I realized very quickly with the way that this was sponging on top of the earth that I was going to need to do 2 layers of this color. So here is 2 coats of flames later. As you can see, I have a much nicer gradient built up between the yellow and the orange and that internal white. And I struggled a lot with getting the pencil drawing for this right. It's really hard to see in this image, but there is kind of a penciled out sketch of where the boosters are. Because of the way I kind of messed with the already odd perspective, I was really struggling to get the boosters at the right size and scale. So at some point, I basically decided to just kind of wing it. It was really hard, and I kind of kept adjusting it as I was painting. It was really hard to get a truly accurate depiction of these boosters. I started with the black because that felt like the easiest option, and then I added the white as gray first. Just like much of the rocket, I figured I might as well start with a gray background and then slowly add up the white. The boosters had the additional challenge because in the reference image, a lot of the bottom portion of the rocket is clouded in this yellow, orange, red haze from the engines. So I wasn't quite sure how that was going to play with the black and the white of the booster. And I will be the first to admit I did not do it well at first. From everything from the booster shape, I had to actually wipe off some of what I did and try to fix it, extend it a little bit, try to make it like match a little bit better. And I had to go over the highlights multiple times by the time I was done with this piece. I was stressing out the entire time I was working on these boosters and am moderately happy with the end result. Getting the shape sorted was definitely the first and arguably biggest hurdle of the entire thing. And then I started doing all of the details. So there's lines on all of the boosters, and on top of the lines, there's shading. So I tried to make sure that all of the highlights were of a yellow or orange tone. I stuck with orange for the black because it is the darker of the two colors, and I went with more of the yellow tones for the white because it is the brighter. And just, black and white do not reflect color in the same way, so I thought that was a smart choice on my part. Who knows? You can tell me differently. But it was definitely a little bit of a challenge to think about how to process these boosters, but I'm arguably happy with the end result overall. So here is the reveal of the full final product where she stands. Of course, as I mentioned in the intro, all we are missing is a monkey knot, and there is a faint outline. I think his head's like right there in his little arm. So I still have to do the little monkey astronaut, take in a little ride, but otherwise, I am so freaking happy with this. I was so concerned about this booster section as I was painting it. It just was not looking right. But once I step back, I think everything looks really, really good. I do also want to, I had to shave down. Obviously, I've talked about how I changed the proportions on that section. So there's some extra matte black in a couple sections where I've lost some stars. So I have to work on that. But other than those like minor touch-ups and erasing the pencil line from where I thought this stupid thing was going to be, erasing all of those tiny, tiny minor details and adding the monkey knot. I mean, this thing is an incredible painting as it is. And if this was for me, I'd probably be leaving it here, but my friend wants the little extra astronaut dude, so we're going to make sure and do that. But that will be next time. This is all the progress I have for you today. This has taken pretty much, I mean, I've been working on it since actually before I uploaded the last video. So just over 2 weeks, and I got this and some other work on the other one done. So I'm pretty sure the next video will be the football player, and hopefully I have a lot more progress to show you there, and maybe I'll finish this guy out. But these have been incredibly rewarding because it has been, and I'm noticing more little issues like that curve is not, we're not gonna worry about it. But this project has been so incredibly rewarding as far as like learning what I'm capable of and like what I can do. The Earth, trash. But that's luckily the background, not the focal point. The rocket is the focal point. And I think the rocket and the moon look incredible. I'm still debating if I want to do like any shading or kind of some more stuff with the moon. But I am so incredibly proud of myself and what I'm able to do and getting this to this point at all. So definitely let me know what you think in the comments down below. Do you think that it looks like what it's supposed to? It is missing. It doesn't have the flags. I know it doesn't have that. And I'm pretty sure it needs like the United States like written down it somewhere. Minor details notwithstanding, do you think it looks like what it's supposed to be? Do you think I screwed up any of the details? What do you think about the moon? What do you think about the flames? Are those, what you think they should? I actually genuinely, please leave a comment. I want to hear your thoughts. Because I'm really proud of this, but I know I can always improve and be better. So please share your thoughts with me and what you think I could do to improve this in the future. Because luckily, while it's still in my garage, I can work on it and make any updates I want. So please share your feedback. I genuinely love reading and responding to comments. It has been absolutely incredible having you watch this video all the way to this point. If you like this and kind of want to see more artsy nonsense, please consider subscribing. It'd be super great. I'm considering doing something fun for 1,000 subscribers. But with all of that, seriously, thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.